Hey guys, welcome back. It is your favorite Gimp with the Limp, and I'm here with a special treat for you all. This is 20th Air Force. It is by Fortress Games, and this is the other one that was part of that Kickstarter that I covered previously. I did 8th Air Force, and when I originally backed this game, I backed just 8th Air Force. I picked one of the two, went with that. Didn't have enough to get both, so I picked one of them. And they saw my review and they were nice enough to send me 20th Air Force because they wanted me to cover that one as well. So I do appreciate them reaching out to me and asking me to cover it. And I was more than happy to do so. And that's because there are great differences between these two games, which I did not know at first. I figured they were both relatively the same. In one, you're bombing Germany, and the other, you're bombing Japan. And that's really it. For the most part, the games would play almost exactly the same. But that's actually completely different. That is way off from what it is. Now, the skeletal structure of these games are the same. And what I mean by that is like the core gameplay itself, right? What you're attempting to do is the same. So in both games, you have your air forces that are going to go out against enemy air forces, and they're going to try to bomb certain targets, okay? So the core element of the games are the same, but the way they play out is completely different. And that does kind of make sense because in both scenarios, right, bombing Germany and bombing Japan, they had different objectives. In the bombing of Japan, the goal was really to come in hard, fast, and to smash them into submission. That's why they dropped the A-bomb, which is in this game. I freaking love that. The goal was to knock the fight out of them. Everyone was tired of the war, and they did not want to have to do an invasion of mainland Japan because they knew that would cost millions of lives. Not only Japanese, but the Allied forces as well, because the war would just continue to drag on. So they wanted to try to knock the fight out of them. And that is your goal here in 20th Air Force, is to come in hard, fast, hit their major and minor cities hard enough to knock them out of the fight. In 8th Air Force, it was points-based, right? And a good way to describe that was more like a diesel engine, right? Start off a little slow, you know, chugga, 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 and then you would ramp up into the game, have a lot more forces, and the Germans would start off doing well, getting a whole bunch of points, and then you'd knock them way back by the end of the game if you won. If you lost, then, you know, you never got that engine started. This one, however, doesn't really work that way. If you're looking at the map here, it's going to look similar to what 8th Air Force was, but there's a whole lot on here. And the big thing is this section here at the top, and this is where all the major cities are kept track of. There are 6 major cities, and I believe it's 13 minor cities spread across the game. But in this one, your goal isn't to destroy the major cities. Your goal is to destroy the minor cities, but you can't start targeting the minor cities until you destroy those major cities. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm not going to play the game per se. If you want to see kind of an example of how the game plays, go check out my 8th Air Force video where I do an example of play, because both examples of play would be relatively similar, the same-ish on how they're going to operate, but I am going to go over this game and its core structure and basically going over what's different, right? Now, you don't have to watch the first video if you don't want to. I will cover enough of this that you'll understand exactly what the game is up to, but it will help if you have seen that one or understand what 8th Air Force is. All right, so to start us off here, this is the player aid that has our calendar and our turn phases, all right? So our sequence of play is on here, and I want to start here because this has a good amount of information to show us basically what's going on. Now, in both games, we had a calendar, and that's basically your turn limit, right? You go down the calendar, you start at the top, and there are counters that I set out here, right here. And you're going to take these. We've got our phase counter here and our turn calendar up here. Turn counter for the calendar, rather. But as you go through the turns, you're going to take this one, you're going to slide it down. And this is going to tell you what bombing campaigns are taking place, any manufacturing that's going on for the Allied forces, what new groups are being introduced into the game. But that's less of a thing here than it was in 8th Air Force. Now, of course, it does happen. There are, new forces that are going to be introduced, and especially if you get into the optional rules, because there are optional rules to give the Japanese rocket planes that they had gotten the plans, because evidently Germany tried to ship them experimental aircraft during the war, but they weren't really able to get them across. They kept trying to disassemble them, put them in U-boats and send them that way, and it wouldn't work. Whole big mess. But it's kind of a theoretical optional rule to allow you to have the Japanese with some advanced German aircraft that they could use against the Allies. That didn't actually happen, but we can simulate it here in the game if we want to. But like I said, you're going to have all the different forces that are going to be introduced over the course of the turns. Now, this campaign is shorter. We got 15 turns, whereas I forget how many there were in 8th Air Force, but there were a fair bit more in 8th Air Force. Now, below this, we've got our bombing campaigns that should look very similar if you saw the first one. To give a basic gist, these are targets that need to be attacked. However, they don't really confer points. These are basically side objectives. And the point of them isn't that you need to destroy them to win the game. You need to destroy these to not lose the game. Because these targets, whether it's mine laying, kamikaze bases, ports, or the preparation for Operation Olympic, those bombing campaigns, if they are not targeted by you, they will tick up to the right and it will go over to the SAC. So basically, you're doing so poorly that the powers that be no longer trust you to oversee the campaign and you get fired and someone else has to replace you. So you don't gain any victory points for taking these targets out, but you will have to target them, at least with some of your forces, just enough to keep the points down, to keep this counter over to the left. Otherwise, it'll tick up to the right over the turns and hit one of the sacked points. Below this, we've got our little win starting the game. That's what the S represents. And this tells you what forces you have, like with the Americans starting off with a handful of B-29s and squadrons for them. And then our Japanese aircraft that start the game. We'll touch on those a little bit more here in a minute. Down to the bottom right, we've got our turn phase, our sequence of play, like I was saying. And then a little brief synopsis here of air combat, how air combat's going to play out. And like I said, the reason I'm not going into that too much in this one is because it's the same on how it played in 8th Air Force. Your planes will go out, they will potentially be intercepted by Japanese aircraft. There'll be a combat, you'll lose some aircraft, they'll lose some aircraft, and then any of your surviving bombers will go on to actually hit the target. To go over everything else, I'm going to kind of walk down this turn record track. So the Imperial Japanese Air Force, they will move their little AA+2. There is AA, just like there was in 8th Air Force, and that will move along these tracks. There are fewer tracks here than there was in the other. Here we only have 5. It's a smaller area that's being hit. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 here. But you'll notice there's a difference. In 8th Air Force, there was only one section. So you had first track or second track, whatever it was, and then just one lane to put your aircraft on. Here we have 2, and that is one of the very, very key differences. We're going to get onto that here in a minute, but that is for high and low altitude bombing, which is so cool that they have that in here because it gives the player so much more choice. And that's what you need for games like this, solitaire games like this, to play well, is player agency, player choice, which you have in abundance here. All right, so you will be manufacturing your units, replacing them if they return to base. There is, down at the bottom right, a return to base spot. And then over here, which, let me slide these counters off for a sec, we've got our research box. This is where we're going to place our destroyed B-29s, because you do have the ability to use research points to basically bring back those B-29s. 1 research point per B-29 that you are bringing back. So as you conduct your operations, you'll have some aircraft that succeed, some aircraft that get returned to base, some aircraft that get destroyed. The destroyed ones will go here, and you're going to use those points that you get each turn, which you only start with 1. You have to work your way up to having more points, and you are going to need a lot of research points, not only to keep your air forces flying as you take your losses, but to gain new abilities, which is one of those new aspects that I really like about this game. We're going to touch on this track a little bit more here in a second. After that, you're going to add or remove bombing campaigns. We already talked about those. And then potentially you'll have bombing by Navy. That's something that starts later into the game. One of those things that's kind of like the British bombing that happened in 8th Air Force. It's extra aircraft, extra what ifs that could have happened that can give you just a little bit more punch, but you're still mainly using your aircraft to get the bulk of the work done. All right, so after that, we get into the thing. We're executing our missions. And our missions are going to be just like they were before. You see all the little spots all across the map here, and you only have access to certain ones at certain times. You're going to have to kind of work your way up to more targets. Now, the bombing campaign ones, like you see here, like kamikaze bases or mines, are on the tracks here, but they're only going to be available at certain times. They're not going to be available at all points of the campaign. And like I said, you don't get points for those. You just have to hit them to keep from losing the game. Your main thing is going to be your major cities, which have the little counters on them, and then those minor cities that are spread across the map. Now, if you're astute, you're paying attention, you're seeing that there's a very key difference here that was not on the 8th Air Force, or actually was on the 8th Air Force one, and it's not here, and that's the manufacturing. So when you looked across the map of Germany in 8th Air Force, you had targets for different types of manufacturing, oil and aircraft production and all that. None of those targets are here. That's because they are built into the cities. That's what this top track is. And you see for each one, you have air production, oil output, infrastructure, and housing. So here, when you are targeting, let's say a major city, let's say we want to hit Tokyo up over here, you're not going to just hit Tokyo. It's not like you just hit it and you draw your counter. Now you will have your random bombing counters for repairs. Your attacks are going to cause damage along these tracks here up at the top, and they are going to tick down to the left as you go. So your goal is to knock out each one of these: air production, oil production, infrastructure. Housing can only be done in a specific way. It can't be done in both types of bombing. Now, it's a good time to go ahead and address the different types of bombing. When you conduct your missions, you're going to have either low altitude or high altitude precision bombing. Low altitude area, just blah, 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 take it all out. High altitude, away from the Japanese fighters, you're much harder to hit by them, but you get to pick specifically what you're going after. Low altitude, you're hitting everything, but you don't get to pick what you're hitting, but you cause more damage. So before I point out what happens on these tracks, let me bring this one back up. This is the new player aid that we have here that we didn't have in 8th Air Force. So you see we have air production, oil, infrastructure here, and this is all above our little research box. As you hit these different targets, you're going to accumulate points, your hits towards them, and that's going to gain you certain bonuses. So like their air production is going to depend on how many times their air production has been hit in their major cities. So you see it's all across the top up here, air production. So as they get hit, and I'm going to touch specifically on how they get hit here in a minute, you're going to tick these counters to the left on whenever they've been hit. That's going to give you a score. You're going to add all those scores up for all the 6 major cities, and it's going to give you a number here, and that's going to tell you how many Japanese aircraft get to be produced. So at 0 hits, they have the highest level of production, and at 30, which is the max, they have the lowest level of production. So they start off being able to produce 6, but they can get knocked all the way down to 1. And it's the same with oil and infrastructure. These both apply different types of modifiers, but they have their own damage tracks here. And you're going to want to target those to reduce the Japanese affectability when they're conducting their combat against you. It's going to make it easier as you go on. And it's kind of nice. They've got these little counters that are going to be used to keep track of that. So as you get air points, you're going to slide this little counter down. Same with the oil and infrastructure. And while we're here on this, so I don't have to keep bringing this out, we've got counters for our research track, for our incendiaries, for recon, for training, and of course, for the A-bomb down here at the bottom. The A-bomb takes a lot of research points. But once you get that, you get a couple of bombs, you get a special squadron that you get to bring out to conduct those bombing raids. Really cool stuff. And when you A-bomb a city, it doesn't get to repair. There's no coming back. Once it's A-bombed, it's gone. So I am going to touch on the research track real quick, since we got it out. That way I can put this player aid away and stop having to bring it back out. There are certain bonuses that you're going to get. One of the big things you want to get is incendiaries, because there is also an incendiary damage track along the top of each one of those major cities. And that's kind of like the A-bomb. When you do the fire damage, once you've unlocked the incendiaries, you're going to cause fire damage to cities, and once they are burned out, they don't get to come back either. So it's another way to take the cities out and keep them from being able to repair the damage that you're doing from your bombing. Also, you definitely want to focus on your training, because when you don't have your training done, you actually get a negative modifier when you're conducting your raids. So that's a good thing to start with. Same with reconnaissance, which will make your bombing easier. And then as you take out major cities, each time you destroy a major city, even if it's restored, you're going to get an extra research point per turn. So you can tick that up to where you're getting a good amount of points each turn, which, like I said, you're going to need those points to get into the A-bomb research. Don't forget, though, that you do have to use the points to rebuild your B-29s as they get taken out, and you are required to take and repair at least 2. So if you have a handful of B-29s in there, you have to repair at least 2 of them before you start putting points towards the actual research stuff. So as a side note, there are 6 special counters that you're going to lay face down, shuffle up, and then divide amongst the cities, and you're going to roll for air production, oil production, infrastructure. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 on a D6, and place them on each one of those determined by the roll. And these little secret counters will give you bonuses towards your research once you destroy that thing. So let's say this counter here for bomb training was on Kobe, and it was on oil output. The first time oil output got hit all the way and was destroyed, you would get to flip this counter and see what it is. There's 4 good ones and 2 duds, and there is a spot up here on the upper right of the board where you can keep track of which ones of these that you've unlocked. So basically, once you get it, even if they repair that track, repair the city, whatever, you don't have to put it back. That's a bonus you get from then on, and you'll place it here on the track to keep track that you have unlocked those little bonuses. So if you've been paying attention, you'll notice that I've talked a lot about air, oil, and infrastructure, but there's also housing. And I haven't mentioned housing too much. And there's a reason for that. Like I was talking about with the low and high altitude bombing, you get to pick your targets only with a high altitude bombing, but you're less likely to be hit by enemy aircraft. So here's our player aid that we're going to use for a little bit of everything: the manufacture, new group placement, city restoration, but we have our air interception over here, okay? When your missions go out, you execute your mission, you're going to roll to see if you were intercepted by the Japanese aircraft that are in that lane, just like you did in 8th Air Force. And it can either be none, half, or all, just like it was. However, you'll notice that the high altitude bombing, 1 through 4 is none. 5 is half and 6 is all. Whereas with low altitude bombing, only 1 is none, and then 2 and 3 are half, and then 4, 5, and 6 are all. So you have a much higher chance of being intercepted if you're doing that low altitude bombing. And you're sitting there going, okay, Gimpy, why would you do low altitude bombing if high altitude is safer and you get to pick your targets? That's because low area bombing gets you more hits per aircraft, which if I remember right, it is reconnaissance that gets you the 3 random instead of 2 random. So let's say we have our 5 bombers, and we'll just grab them up here, going out, and they hit, let me pick a nice center city. They hit Nagoya here, right here in the center, okay? If they were all doing high altitude bombing, and you can't mix, they're either high altitude or they're low altitude, all right, when you're conducting a mission. And Nagoya's right here, not right there. It accidentally got put on a minor city. But let's say they're hitting here and they hit a high altitude mission. All of them survive, they all get their hits. Well, that's 5 aircraft, so I can pick 5 hits on these tracks, all right, up here at the top. And I just take it down 5 points between the top 3, not housing. I don't get to pick housing, okay? But I get to pick. Now, let's say they were low altitude bombing, and we'll say we don't have reconnaissance, so it's just 2. For each aircraft that conducted the raid and survived, right, so it wasn't shot down, I get to roll a d6, and it tells me what they hit, all right? That's what these letters signify, whether it's air, oil, infrastructure, or housing. This is the only way to hit that housing track, which has to be destroyed as well when you're going after the cities. You can't just ignore it. So if these 5 hit Nagoya and they were low altitude bombing, I would roll a d6 for each one of them, and that would give me, without reconnaissance, that would give me 2 hits per. So I effectively double their damage that they do, but I don't get to pick what the damage is. And then after I get some research done, I triple the damage that they do. All right. So low altitude bombing is going to give you a massive boost to your damage. You're going to get a lot more bang for your buck for each mission that you execute, but your aircraft are going to be in a lot more danger when they conduct their attacks, and you don't get to pick what targets you hit. But again, it's the only way you can hit that bottom track, which you are going to have to hit if you want to win the game. Here's the thing though. If you look across our map here, the major cities are the only ones where you get a choice. Everything else tells you what it is. So like our minor cities here, they're all low altitude bombing. The victory cities, the minors are the ones you have to destroy, not the majors. But you have to destroy every major city to unlock the minor cities so you can actually start bombing them. So you have to take out these 6 cities to unlock the actual targets of the campaign, which are those minor cities. And those minor cities can only be targeted by that low altitude bombing. Everything else that is on the board will tell you. Usually, I think the bombing campaigns generally are high altitude, with the exception of the kamikaze. Yeah. Kamikaze base here, it's low altitude, but the mines are high altitude. Nope, this beach drop, this is a bombing campaign. That's a low altitude. Low altitude, that's minor. High altitude for the ports. So the bombing campaigns are kind of a mix. But the big ones, those minor cities, are all low altitude bombing. That's the basic gist of it. Now, I'm not getting into all the specifics. There's the basic goal that you're shooting for, which they call MPD. It's the major practical destruction. Basically, you hit a certain point in the game where you've burned out the majority of the cities, and that's what's going to unlock the minor cities. And then when you actually take out all the major cities, your goal, in my opinion, now Bob might disagree, but I think going for those destruction of the 6 major cities needs to be goal number 1, because once you get that, you get a slew of bonuses, some extra aircraft. But the big one is you get 10 research points, 1 for each one of the cities, and then 4 from the research track per turn, 10 points per turn. And that's really when you could start dumping some points into those A-bomb research points. Unlock those A-bombs, and you can have more than 2. It's not just historical. You can bomb, a lot of cities across this board and really start targeting those minor cities. And it seems like, from what I saw him saying online a little bit, that you kind of want to focus high altitude bombing, conserve your forces, start taking out those tracks, focus on the ones that have the bonus markers on them so you can get those early bonuses as quickly as possible. And don't switch to your low altitude bombing until later in the campaign, when you have more forces and you have more research points that you can use to repair your forces as you take hits, because you are going to be intercepted a lot when you start doing those low altitude bombing campaigns, but you are going to have to do them. So you need to do them at a point in the game when you're best prepared to actually conduct those attacks. In other words, you don't really want to jump the gun. You want to be smart about it. Like I said, if you see an example of how a raid is conducted, because they're both conducted relatively the same, with the exception of how the hits are done. In 8th Air Force, you simply, place your bomb counter on whatever target that you're hitting. Now, you will do that here in some targets across this board, but the big difference is that you are going to be going across those damage tracks across the top. That's going to be your big focus for a good chunk of the game. But in 8th Air Force and this one, 20th Air Force, both the combats are handled the same. You're going to use your chart here for your combat results table, and it's either going to tell you either return to base or destroyed. Japanese Air Forces are going to ignore a return to base result, so they're only going to be destroyed. But just from what I could see, it seems like you're going to have, from my time playing the game off camera, more Air Force. Just from my time off camera with the game, I did feel like I encountered a much stiffer air resistance. There are many more Japanese aircraft in the air than I felt like I was encountering with the Germans. And I think that's because there's fewer tracks, and there's still a good number of these Japanese aircraft in the air. And like I said, you do have the option to run a track, a bombing execute mission, doing that high altitude precision bombing that more than likely, was it 2/3 of a chance you're not going to be intercepted. So there's more resistance because you're less likely to be intercepted until later in the game. But that does mean that when you start executing those lower missions, you're going to be hurt. So you guys should know already, if you saw my first one, that I liked 8th Air Force. And I really wouldn't be surprised to hear me say that I like 20th Air Force too. And honestly, and this is just me, this is just my opinion, I think I made the wrong choice when I picked 8th instead of 20th, because I really like the interaction here. But I really don't think you can go wrong with either game, because in a way, the difference is that in 8th Air Force, these tracks are kind of brought down to the map, right? Because there are targets on the map to hit for air production, oil, and infrastructure, rather than that being located in the cities. Also, it played different in the fact that from the right to the left, as the time went on, your play area would get smaller, right? The Germans were being pushed back in the war, so you had less lanes to go on. You started out with 8, if I remember right, and end with 5. So I think you end with the same amount. You lose 3 tracks over the course of the game. But between the two, I like 20th better. And that's me. The Pacific is my jam. I like Pacific more than I like the European theater. So I am going to go more towards this one. Plus the ability to A-bomb your targets. And I like the interaction here with the top with the damage tracks, where you have that choice, like, do I want more damage that I can't control, or specific damage? I want to hit a very specific target. And like I said, early on in that game, you have that choice and you want to try to get these bonuses because it's really going to increase your odds. You're going to get more points. If you get the recon going early, then you can get even better results from your low altitude bombing. You're getting 3 hits instead of just 1, well, with the major cities anyway. But both games feel kind of like a puzzle in their own right. You're trying to figure out the best way to react to the scenarios that are playing out in front of you. You've got your must-hit targets that don't do anything for you, but you have to hit them. And then with the remaining forces, you're trying to take out the things that you need to and keep your forces alive long enough to go. And for me, I like the ability to kind of rebuild my forces. I feel like it gives me a little bit more opportunity to be a touch more reckless. And plus that means that you can have chances for things like the Hail Mary low altitude bombing, that if you just get this one bombing run in and hit the right targets, you're going to luck out and it could swing the game in your favor. But then your plane might get shot down by AA, or you might miss your target completely, which, you know, was a possibility they had at that time. So, which I really think plays into the thematic feel of what this game is trying to achieve. So honestly, I don't think you're going to go wrong with either. If it's just me having to pick, I'm going to lean towards 20th now. But both are fine. It's really going to come down to your personal preference. Watch both videos, see which one appeals to you more, and play that one. Like I said, for me, I get to A-bomb some cities and things like that. And in a way, I almost feel like 20th is harder because I feel like there's more pieces to that puzzle, right? And 8th, you just got to ramp up and hit the right targets at the right time and eventually kind of swing the game in your direction. Whereas with 20th, a lot of moving parts have to fall into place and you're kind of juggling a lot of plates up in the air, hoping that everything goes your way. You don't get intercepted. You do get the lucky roll when you're targeting things with your low altitude bombing. Especially, I think, this housing track down here at the bottom that can only be hit by a type of bombing that is random. Right? So you're going to have a lot of missions where you're running like, no, stop bombing air. Air's already destroyed. Bomb housing. You keep missing the housing, you know, and you're going to keep doing that until you finally hit it. And then all of a sudden the game's going to swing in your direction because you're going to get that massive influx of research points and suddenly be able to research the A-bomb. And then once you start doing that, you can burn out cities and A-bomb them. Any city that is burned out completely up here on this incendiary track, it's gone, right? Can't be repaired. Any city that's bombed by an A-bomb, and that's major cities or minor cities, can't be repaired. So you'll start seeing it towards the end of the game where you've got those counters on the board that that city's not coming back. I know I've got those victory points locked in. Now, like I showed you earlier, they're going to start up here at the top. They're going to have a fair amount of their planes coming back. You'll feel like everything that you're taking out is just coming back the next turn and there's nothing you can do. But as you slowly take those things down, all of a sudden, they're not getting those planes back anymore. You're not encountering that resistance anymore. And on top of that, as this track's going down, this track's going up. So you're getting more of yours back and they're getting less of theirs back. Well, if you play it the right way anyway. All right, any potential dings for the game? Comes to components. Components are fine with the exception that is laser cut counters. I don't mind them. You might. If you do, hit it with a damp paper towel or a wet wipe or something like that. Just make sure you wipe down the counter sheets when you first get it because they can be a little sooty, a little smudgy. But honestly, you see these are white, right? Look at that. There's really not much on there. So for being laser cut counters, I have seen much worse. I have seen them where they're black on the back, right? Half of it was blackened. These aren't like that. They're not just burnt pieces. They're perfectly fine. A light, damp cloth, you're not going to notice any problems with it. As far as the rest of the components go, hell, it's got a mounted map and then just a handful of player aids and a rule book. That's it. There's really not a whole lot of components. And again, you got 2 dice with it. But in this one, the dice color doesn't make as much of a difference. So I can use my double 6 dice, not have to worry about the colors. But anyway, that is going to be it for me on this one. I hope you guys have enjoyed it. Sorry it took me a little bit longer to get this one out than I had planned on, but hey, I was able to touch on it. And thanks again to Fortress Games for sending this one to me. I am definitely happy to have it on my shelf. Both of them look really good next to each other, and they play really well. Although, yeah, I like 20th better. And like I said, it's me personally. Both are fine, but I like 20th better. You guys take care. I'll catch you in the next one.